United States Congressman Josh Gottheimer serves the 5th District here in New Jersey, which covers parts of Bergen, Passaic, and Sussex Counties. And he is joining us today to talk about the AM for Every Vehicle Act. Congressman, good morning and welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Why is this such an important issue for you?
This for me, listen, I love AM radio and FM radio too. I love listening to talk and sports and news. But for me, as a member of Congress, this is about protecting the country and the people I represent. AM radio was built and backed by our government from a security perspective for one reason. We want to make sure that if there is everything from terrorist attack like we saw after 9/11 to a storm to any kind of nuclear threat or other critical emergency for our country, that people, no matter what, are able to get information. And, cell phone batteries run out, power goes down, your TV is out. What doesn't go out is AM radio, because the country has invested in the National Public Warning System, meaning we make sure that AM radio stations across the country that reach more than 90% of America have backup battery systems and resilience packages to make sure that emergency alerting is there no matter what.
I can tell you from a personal standpoint, Congressman, here at WDHA and WMTR, we have a backup generator in the event that the power does go down, because it's vital to us, to both radio stations, to be able to inform our listeners of what's happening.
That's exactly right. And people go to AM radio when there's a crisis. They know that's where they can go. If other things go down, think about after Sandy or Hurricane Ida or after 9/11, or even a snowstorm like this week. When there's a problem, people can go to their car. If their power's out, they can go to their car and turn on the AM radio. Or of course, they can go to their transistor radio they have in the closet at home, which I recommend people keep. But what's going on now, and why I've been focusing on this legislation, is that there are auto manufacturers, particularly who build electric vehicles, EV vehicles, that are taking AM radio out of their vehicles, literally. And Tesla being the leader on this, who decided to take AM radio out of their EVs, and other manufacturers are doing the same thing to save a few bucks. There's some interference that happens between AM and electric vehicles, and what you need to do is put a very low-cost coating on it. I drive a Ford electric vehicle. I have AM radio. It has the coating. It works just fine. Tesla decided, hey, we're going to save a few bucks, but at the cost of people's safety and security. So what I've called for is legislation to require that you keep AM radio in the vehicles, one, and then two, that when you go to a car dealer now to buy a car, on the sticker on the window, it actually says this car is unsafe in national emergencies, and if it's missing an AM radio, so people know the choice that they're making.
You mentioned Tesla, and it strikes me as not just a little odd that Elon Musk, of course, who is such a big proponent, so he says, of free speech, and thus what he's done with Twitter/X or whatever he's calling it now, but such a proponent of free speech is taking free radio, or wants to take free radio, out of his electric vehicles.
Yeah, no, I mean, you think that if Elon Musk has enough money to buy Twitter and send rockets to space, he can afford to include AM radio in his Teslas. But this is the kind of decisions people are making to save a penny here or there. They're willing to put people's safety at risk, and that's unacceptable to me. So I've told the Highway Transportation Safety Administration, I've urged them to require all these vehicles sold to have these stickers, no radio warning, no AM radio, vehicle unsafe in certain emergencies. But get this now broadly supported bipartisan legislation with more than 200 Democrats and Republicans in the House, and I think about 45 or so senators, bipartisan, saying AM radio for Every Vehicle Act, it's got to be included in these vehicles for America's national security.
When you're talking bipartisan, you're not kidding either. You have people from both ends of the spectrum, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Ted Cruz.
Both on the bills. Could you imagine that?
How the heck did you pull that off?
I mean, it's like rabbit out of the hat. I don't know. I don't know. But right. I mean, who would have thunk? But I'll tell you this, though. This is one of these things you talk to people about and they go, wait, what are they doing? They're going to actually take AM radio out of my car or out of my truck? That makes no sense to me. And it's one of these things like common sense that you would have that in there. We know what people need AM radio for. Listen, people love AM radio, put it all aside, right? AM radio listening time is up, right? 47 million Americans listen to AM radio every week. Satellite radio is great too. I like it, but guess what? Satellite radio has no backup or resiliency. So if there's a problem and power is out, your AM radio is out. I mean, sorry, your satellite radio is out, or your AM radio stays on. And that's just the reality of it. And by the way, only 10% of the country actually has satellite radio. So if you want to reach the country, right, you need AM radio. And I don't know why we would walk away from it right now after we've invested so much in our national public warning system.
You know, you mentioned satellite radio, and one of the things about satellite radio is that it is not local, unlike WMTR, unlike WDHA, which is live, local, and free.
I listen to WDHA, so I've got my bias, but
I do too. I fully admit it.
But you're right about the local piece. That's why we love radio, right? Local radio it brings you local news, local information, local sports, obviously local entertainment. But it also this is a secondary benefit, which is why the government invested in this, because we know that people love their AM radio, and it's free, and you get it, right? You just get to turn it on and it's there, right? And satellite radio costs money. These other things cost money. AM radio will be there for you when you have a problem. You turn it on. FM radio too. You turn it on. It's there. We know AM radio will always be there for these purposes. So I'm just encouraging everybody to please, and if you know anyone who works in government around here, and just make it clear that you want to make sure AM radio stays in there. When you go buy a car, tell the dealer, hey, you should really only make sure you should call Volvo and tell them to include AM radio in it, because they're taking it out of the electric vehicles. And a bunch of these auto manufacturers are. Now, Ford got smart and actually decided they took it out and then they put it back in when we brought this up as an issue. But you got BMW and Polestar and Rivian and Volkswagen and Volvo, as I mentioned, and Mazda. They've all taken it out in their electric vehicles, and it's putting public safety at risk.
You have an interesting background. You mentioned that you have a Ford electric vehicle. You worked for Ford. You worked for Microsoft. You worked for the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. How did all of that come together with where you are now and this bill?
Well, you might imagine, because I saw it from the FCC standpoint, working at the Federal Communications Commission, understanding the value of this, and worked on, by the way, this is one of the areas I worked on for the chairman, was security, national security, and this whole area. So I have experience in seeing the value of it, whether it's a cyber attack or natural disaster. And then at Microsoft, I'm at tech. I love tech, right? So I love all the technology stuff. I love electric vehicles. And as I mentioned, you mentioned, I worked at Ford. I worked on the first American hybrid. These are all things I believe in. But that's why I scratch my head and say, bringing all these pieces together, saying this makes no sense, which is why I decided to help lead this legislation. And I'm going to keep fighting for it until we get it done. It's one of the bills with the most bipartisan support in the Congress right now.
And I do want to point out that in addition to what you've been talking about and we've been talking about this morning here, even the United Nations has gotten involved. They just published a position paper called Radio, the Trusted Guide in a Changing World. And that's designed to protect not only AM radio in cars, but all terrestrial radio, including FM as well.
I'd love to hear that. I mean, as somebody who just believes in radio and we know how much it brings, how much richer it makes all of our lives, especially our Jersey radio stations. Not to, again, be a little biased here, but let's be honest. It's great content. I love listening to it, especially when it has Springsteen on. It makes me extra happy. So don't be afraid to play a little Springsteen. So if that's okay, Jim.
Oh, that's fine. Believe me, that is fine. For WDHA and WMTR listeners who want to learn more or want to help, what do they do?
Well, first of all, go to my website, gottheimer.house.gov, gottheimer.house.gov. You'll see we've got plenty of stuff on AM radio. If you Google it, you'll see plenty about this issue. And again, when you go buy a car, make it clear how you feel about this, because that makes a difference. And of course, when you tell your friends about this as an issue, it's a great way to let people know that this is not something we should be quiet about. We should speak out about. So thank you so much, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Congressman Josh Gottheimer. He represents the 5th District, Bergen, Passaic, and Sussex County. Thank you so much for your time this morning here on WDHA and WMTR.
It was great talking to you. As I co-chair a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, half Democrat, half Republican. I'll tell you, this is an issue where there is massive bipartisan support. So this is not partisan. This is just what's good for our country. So thanks for having me.